Joy collected over time fuels resilience, ensuring we'll have reservoirs of emotional strength when hard things do happen, says Brené Brown. Well, hard things are happening every day these days, aren't they? And we need courage to walk this difficult path. Every day we wake up to a 24/7 news cycle that brings us more painful stories, both natural and man-made. Millions of people in India impacted by hurricanes, by floods. California on fire, Hawaii devastated by hurricanes and lava. Children and babies being separated from their parents, in some cases never likely to be reunited. Families who've lived and worked in the United States for decades being torn apart, sometimes in the middle of the night, deported, perhaps never to see each other again. We see black and brown people repeatedly being discriminated against, their lives undervalued, imprisoned in exaggeratedly disproportionate numbers. LGBTQ folk are increasingly victims of hate crimes and prejudice. And we watch as women's rights to make choices about our own bodies, are gradually being rolled back by government restrictions. Women and children are being degraded and treated as chattel by sexual predators in positions of power. Our children are being shot and killed at school. Innocent people gunned down at concerts, movie theaters, and supermarkets. Guns are readily available to those who are angry and broken. And our precious earth continues to be irrevocably strip-mined and plundered for profit. We stare in disbelief as our government makes friends with enemies and denigrates our historic allies. And one scandal after another unfolds in the wee hours of the morn as hate never sleeps. It hardly seems bearable. So much horror happening all around us constantly. Each day, the news is particularly painful to people who care about the inherent worth and dignity of all, who care about the preciousness of this earth. And to the empaths among us, it can feel like darts are thrown daily at our hearts. I found myself crying in empathy and outrage with hardly a moment to find equilibrium in between the onslaught of assaults. I've had to cut back watching or listening to the news where all of these events are heightened so that I can digest things in a calmer, more thoughtful manner through a regular old paper newspaper. Raise your hand if you struggle with all of this too. We're not alone. But what do we do with this daily assault on humanitarian values? What do we do with the chronic pain and fear that we feel, with our anger at the injustice we see, when we feel powerless to stop this madness? What do we do when our Unitarian Universalist values that speak of compassion and interconnectedness, of dignity and worth, and of beloved community are so completely dismissed by rampant individualism, unrestricted capitalism, greed, hate, violence, and power abuse? It's easy to let hate grow in our own hearts, to hate the haters, hate for the sense of impotence we often feel, hate because we're angry, righteously angry. And yet, my friends, as righteous as our anger may be, we know in our hearts there's something bigger we are called to do. We know in our hearts we will never restore justice if we meet hate with hate. The hate mongers will have won. Their approach to life has led us to take on hate as currency rather than standing resolutely knowing that love is the only answer. That holding on to love in the face of fear, always siding with love, no matter how hard, is the way to go. Now, our mind battles with our heart over this answer because this is hard. It goes against our reptilian, warring DNA, and it's harder now than it even was 2 years ago. 2 years ago, when I started here, I gave the congregation the picture that is hanging in the foyer, and on it it says, "Love is hard. Do it anyway." And there are further wise words in between, and I encourage you not to pass it by as just some poster on the wall, but to read it fully every week if you can as you enter or leave, because truly, that's our mission as Unitarian Universalists. That's our goal, to keep loving the world in the face of haters, bullies, violence, and greed. And like children raised in an abusive home, we must work hard not to let this dysfunctional way of being shape us. We must not return like with like. An eye for an eye only succeeds in leaving the whole world blind. We must be determined to raise our consciousness. We must commit to not allowing ourselves to be swallowed up and molded into participants or even bystanders to this hate-filled dysfunction. But how do we do that? It's easier said than done. It's so much easier to just hate someone back, to assassinate their character, their opinions, or their arguments in return. It's instinctive, but it doesn't lead anywhere. It doesn't change a thing. It doesn't even make you feel better for more than just a few minutes. And in doing so, we merely perpetrate a harmful system. We become part of the problem. We become hurt people who hurt people. Now, without doubt, we need to go out and protest this madness. We must, so we're not complicit with the status quo. Anger is energy, and we can transmute that anger into something useful. We can say no more while we demarcate boundaries to intolerance, to prejudice, to violence, and to greed, and we don't have to be paralyzed into inaction. But fortunately, inaction is hardly what most of us UUs are guilty of. Many of you are out there organizing, protesting, canvassing, fighting for the good for all. But frankly, that also is what worries me sometimes. You're all so committed, so passionate, so directed that I worry that fighting fires on so many fronts is straining our collective mental and physical health. Now, it may seem counterintuitive, but this is also a very important time to cultivate joy, laughter, and delight. To fill our gas tanks with love, connection, and hope. The time to determinately keep seeing beauty and goodness in the world. To seek out some healthy silliness so we're not drowned by madness and dysfunction. And this is also the time when our spiritual practices must grow and deepen. UUA President Reverend Susan Frederick Gray calls us to action by saying, this is no time for a casual faith. Our Unitarian Universalist values, our communities and practices are needed now more than ever. Now's the time we need to come together as a community to support one another. Now's the time we need to let go of the small stuff, the petty grievances, and galvanize ourselves to rise united as a force for love. Now's the time we need to practice daily feeding our hearts with joy, with laughter, with beauty, love, goodness, and vitality, so our beings have the strength needed for the days ahead. Now, the blessing of these difficult times is that people are gathering. People of all ages and all backgrounds are stepping up to stand against injustice. And they are searching for places where the values of the heart are honored. And that kind of place is right here. So we must lead the way. We must lead the way in our call for justice and compassion for all, but we must also lead the way in spiritual practice that strengthens and renews us, so we have the courage, inspiration, and energy to continue. We must lead the way as a source where people can draw the healing waters of balance and peace in a time of tumult. Are you game? So how do we cultivate joy? I'm curious what your definition of joy is. It's a huge word. Does it resonate for you, or do you need another word? It's good? For me, it's a deep sense of delight and aliveness, a sense of feeling full with beauty and the magic of life. Now, for you, it may mean well-being or pleasure, or gladness, or laughter, or euphoria. Does joy seem hard to find right now? Perhaps too much hope for this time? Or does it feel frivolous and self-centered to focus on joy right now? But focusing only on the negative is not restorative. If we fill our minds with the problems and difficulties of our society and our lives, we will not have the energy or life force to bring the light and be resilient. And we haven't even talked about all the individual struggles people are going through, of loss, of illness, around finances, and relationship difficulties that some of you are wrestling with. These difficulties compound the effect of what's happening outside our walls. My friends, so much of our unhappiness comes from our minds. The other day, as I went to catch a flight, there was a woman on the same airport shuttle who was extremely stressed and angry. When I inquired whether she was worried about missing her flight, she said, "No, I'm just upset because I had to wait so long for the shuttle to come. I am going to make my flight, but I'm really mad." And she then proceeded to be angry at the driver and even wanted to run from one terminal to another rather than stay in the shuttle any longer. She was so mad. And it was a great example of how her suffering was purely created in her mind. There was no existential reason for her suffering. And I was grateful for that lesson. Mental immunity, says the Dalai Lama, is just learning to avoid the destructive emotions and to develop positive ones. And just as a healthy immune system and healthy constitution protect your body against potentially hazardous viruses and bacteria, mental immunity creates a healthy disposition of the mind so that it will be less susceptible to negative thoughts and feelings. One must develop the mind over time and develop mental immunity, he says. So that is what we must strive for, to develop and strengthen our mental immunity so we can still find joy and breed resilience during challenging times. Are you willing? The Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, in their book on joy, which you so thoughtfully and generously gave me for my birthday this year, talk about the path of joy being about seeing ourselves always in connection to others. The path of pain and struggle on the other hand, is to think of ourselves as separate from others. The Dalai Lama says, when we see ourselves as separate, when we see others as separate, they become a threat. When we see others as part of us, as connected, as interdependent, then there is no challenge we cannot face together. And doesn't that idea resonate with our 7th UU principle of the interconnected web of all existence? When we remember that we are all connected, we behave differently with one another and we care more deeply about each other. Historian Howard Zinn wrote an article in The Nation magazine called "The Optimism of Uncertainty." And in it, he encourages us to keep looking for what is good and right, because what we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. He writes, if we only see the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us energy to act and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. So looking for the good, laughing together, noticing beauty, and there is so much beauty all around us, and noises of magical different things. Focusing on what brings us joy and laughter, allowing ourselves to be dumbstruck by the awe and majesty of this universe. These are all ways for us to cultivate joy and resilience in the midst of it all. Psychologist Rick Hansen has done a lot of research on this. His research shows that neurons in our brains are changed by what we think. If we focus on things that are wrong, that are causing us stress, that make us angry or despair, then our brains will increasingly get wired to focus on those things. In a sense, our brains are like Velcro for bad experiences and like Teflon for good, he writes. We need to intentionally reverse that natural habit in order to feel good in the midst of difficult times. The most powerful method I know, he writes, is to deliberately look for positive experiences and take them in by being present with them. This helps the brain register positive experiences long enough for those neurons that are firing together positively to start wiring together. And he suggests a few techniques for practicing this. First of all, look at the good facts. Think about some good facts and turn them into good experiences. Intentionally look for things that you appreciate, even if they're ordinary, whether it's a good cup of coffee in the morning, or the blue sky, which we have very abundantly here, or the traffic flowed smoothly this morning. Spend a moment taking in these experiences rather than just ignoring them or taking them for granted. When you notice something good, he says, let yourself feel good about it. Will you try it with me now? Yeah? Okay, we're going to do a little exercise. So think of some ordinary good fact, or look around you and see something or someone that you appreciate. Now allow yourself to really enjoy the experience. Soak it in. Focus on it a little longer than usual. Take it in deeply. And then allow yourself to feel and sense the experience in your body, not just in your mind. Let it flow through your body. Imagine a warm glow within you, or visualize warm oil filling your body and oozing into all the achy, empty, hurt places. Try to get a real sensation of this experience, filling you up and soothing you. Are you there? Are you feeling all this goodness inside you? I promise you that if you spend more time on things that are good in your life and let them fill you up physically and mentally, your neurochemistry will shift. Now, I know many of you are already meditating daily, or going out into nature, or watching comedy, or you're singing, dancing, or creating some kind of art to fuel your capacity for joy. But for those of you who feel weary, or tired, or in need of more communal activities to counter all the anger and hate, I invite you to join me in a course that I'll be teaching this year on this very topic: cultivating joy and resilience in challenging times. Beginning in October, each month we'll explore and deepen practices that will help us sustain and fortify us and delight us and grow our joy and resilience. And I invite you to join me. This class will take place on the second Sunday of each month from 2 to 4 in the afternoon. So you have time to go out for lunch after services and come to the class well-fed and inspired. Please invite your friends and share this with our wider community so that we can spread this love and resilience to many people who need it now, so that we can lead the way in restoring ourselves and being strong for what these times ask of us. You can sign up for this class in the office with our administrator, Diana, or by emailing her. And please look for information in our news and notes. It will begin on October 14th, and I hope you will join us. And if there's anyone here who wishes to assist me in creating that class, please let me know. I leave you with a quote by Joseph Campbell. We cannot cure the world of sorrows, but we can choose to live in joy. My friends, may we go forth and cultivate joy so that we can indeed be a beacon of love, justice, and compassion in these difficult times. May it be so.